You have planned a reading or listening lesson. You look at your list of blocking words and think, okay, but what's the best way to teach them? Should I use pictures, translations, definitions, example sentences, mime? If you ask 10 teachers, you probably get 10 different answers. Hi, I'm Raffaella Manzo, founder of ProTEFL Institute, where I support English teachers through lesson planning, methodology consultations and teacher training. And on this channel, we explore the thinking behind effective teaching. But before we talk about techniques, there is one principle that shapes almost every decision I make. If students are discovering the meaning of a new word, I make one thing absolutely clear. They're not supposed to know it. That might sound obvious, but I think we often forget to say it. We ask students to match words with pictures, guess meanings, or infer vocabulary from context without telling them that the words are new. Some students might think, oh, I should know this. Why don't I know it? Everyone probably knows it. And suddenly what was meant to be a learning activity starts to feel like a test. So before we begin, I simply tell them, these are new words. You're not expected to know them. Your job is to work out the meaning together. That changes the atmosphere completely. Students stop worrying about getting the right answer and start solving a problem. That's also why I often ask students to work in pairs or small groups. They compare ideas, eliminate possibilities, justify their choices, and gradually construct the meaning together. Now, is this more time-consuming than simply telling students the answer? Absolutely. But remember what we decided in the previous videos. We're only doing this with a small number of carefully selected blocking words. Words we've already decided are essential for students to complete the task. So spending an extra minute helping students discover the meaning is usually time well spent. Especially if I want students to remember the word and use it later. Now, we can ask the next question. What's the best way to help students discover that meaning? The answer depends on the word, the learner, and the task, and the objective of the lesson. So let's look at some of the most common techniques. When I use them, when I avoid them, and how I try to make each one as student-centered as possible. Let's start with visual support. For most teachers, that means pictures, but depending on the word, visual support might also mean using a real object, or even a gesture, or mime. Pictures are brilliant when you're teaching concrete vocabulary, like objects, animal, places, things students can actually see. Imagine tomorrow's reading is about a family holiday. One of your blocking words is lighthouse. Would I spend 5 minutes explaining it? Well, probably not. One clear picture is enough. Students recognize the word and then can move on to the reading. But now imagine the blocking word is responsibility or justice or freedom. Suddenly, a picture isn't doing much work anymore. The lesson objective matters too. If students simply need to recognize the word while reading, a picture might be all they need. If I expect them to use that word later in a discussion or a piece of writing, I probably need to revisit it after the reading and work with it more deeply. Now, here's the important part. Instead of showing a picture and saying, this is a lighthouse, turn it into a task. Students could match words to pictures, eliminate the incorrect images, or work in pairs and justify their choices. Exactly the same vocabulary, much more thinking. Another technique is translation. It's probably the most controversial technique. Some teachers avoid it completely. Personally, I think that's a mistake. Translation is simply another tool, and sometimes it's exactly the right decision. Imagine you're teaching an upper intermediate class. There is one unfamiliar word in the reading, forklift. But today's lesson isn't about transport vocabulary. It's about workplace safety. Would I spend 5 minutes trying to listen the word forklift? Well, probably not. I'd translate it. Check that students understand it and move on. Because vocabulary isn't today's main learning object. The reading is, or the listening is. Translation saves time, it reduces unnecessary cognitive load, and it allows students to focus on the task that really matters. But not every blocking word is just a blocking word. Sometimes I know this is vocabulary my students are likely to meet again. Or perhaps I'm teaching English for specific purposes, and this isn't simply an unfamiliar word. It's part of the language they'll need in their studies or at work. In that case, I probably don't want students to simply recognize the word today. I want them to start remembering it for the future. So instead of simply giving students the answer, I might ask them to match English words with their L1 equivalents. Choose between two possible translations. Identify the incorrect translation, or explain why one translation fits better than another. But the translation is still there. But now students are processing the meaning rather than simply receiving it. Before I translate, I ask myself, am I using translation because it's the best decision for this lesson or because it's the quickest option? Now let's look at definitions. Definitions can work really well, especially with upper intermediate and advanced learners, as long as the definition is actually easier than the word. Otherwise, we've solved nothing. Imagine you're teaching the word generous. If your definition is someone who willingly gives money or help to other people, that's probably helpful. But if your definition contains 3 more unknown words, students now have a bigger problem that they had before. And sometimes a definition on its own isn't quite enough. A simple example sentence can make the meaning much clearer. Before we finish, there's one activity I'd like to mention. Not because it's another vocabulary technique, but because it works with almost every technique we've discussed, which is matching. If you think about it, we've already been using it throughout this video. Students can match words to pictures, words to translations, words to definition, but that's only the beginning. With more proficient learners, they can match words to synonyms or antonyms. They can match verbs to their most common collocations. For example, make with a decision, or pay with attention, or take with a responsibility. You can also ask students to match words to example sentences, deciding which sentence best illustrates the meaning. Or make the task slightly more challenging. Remove the target word from the sentence and ask students to match each word to the correct gap. Now, they aren't only thinking about the meaning, they're also using grammar, collocation, and context to make that decision. The format is still matching, but the thinking has become much richer. That's why I like matching so much. Not because it's particularly innovative, but because it's incredibly flexible. The format stays the same, the cognitive demand changes, and that's something we control as teachers. Before planning a matching activity, I ask myself, what exactly do I want students to notice? The meaning? The form? The collocation? Because the activity should always reflect the learning objective, not the other way around. If you enjoyed this video, I'd really appreciate if you subscribe to the channel. If you'd like more ideas like this delivered straight to your inbox, feel free to join the ProTEFL newsletter as well. Every week I share practical ideas like this. Not just activities you can copy, but the thinking behind the decisions we make as language teachers. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.